Hello and welcome. I am JP. I am going to start off with just wow. This is a lot, but none of it's unexpected. For better or worse, we've been talking about a lot of people have been talking about Project 2025 and what they plan to do. And at the time of me recording this, they have not squared their sights perfectly on the Department of Education, but it's supposedly coming. This is disheartening for a lot of reasons because there's no real opposition, so it's a scary time to be around for sure. And it's particularly scary if you are somebody who works in or has a child with special needs or something like that, because a lot of the things that sort of dictate school and schooling for children like that is the federal government. The IDEA and the Office of Civil Rights and all of these sort of things are federal mandates. Now, depending on where you live, you may be able to be safe, but in a lot of places you may not. And I think that is a troubling thing about where we are. It's yeah. I will be back on the mic, I guess, once something does happen, and we can talk about it together. But for one thing that we do know is happening is the school choice push that is coming through, and it's going to ramp up. It's been going on. It's been a slow trickle this entire time, and I think now they're going to shoot their shot. I posted this the other day on Instagram in terms of what happens next, and they've said it. They've been unapologetic about it. But I have to say it's infuriating because the road to this moment was paved a while ago. Like all they really have to do is not much, and it's just infuriating. And a big part of what's going to be this push is the recent NAEP scores that came out. And these scores, like a whole lot of other scores, like the US News ranking and stuff like that, have always been problematic because of what they don't tell you. Always. But it's just enough information for people to go, and I've seen it on, Blue Sky or in other places where people have already said, well, Catholic schools are teaching children and it's so much cheaper. And it's just, at this point, I think we have to combat lore. We have private school lore that needs to be addressed, and I don't know if it's too late or not, but I think it's worth a shot because there are so many things it doesn't say because we like things short and easy. All of us, like as a whole country, we just like to keep things short, and there are setbacks to that. There's a problem in trying to make complicated things overly simple. The numbers you see can't tell you the whole story because they're just a bunch of numbers. The why of those numbers never gets explained. The intricacies of those numbers never get explained. But we have other things that don't necessarily jive with those numbers. Like if you ask most people, they say they love their kid's school. It's just the public schools in the abstract sense are failing, quote unquote. It's like, oh, the children can't read. It's like, well, can they not read or just haven't been taught to read? And in that way, will this be it'll be a positive thing? Is there a positive version of this story? I think it's a provocative question because it has gotten bad, but it's gotten bad in part because of the disinvestment of people of means. Like we have a segregated education system in the United States, and that feels like it's a really big problem. This will only make it worse, for sure. School choice sort of fracturing us even more than we're already fractured as it is. It's going to be a disaster. I mean, just thinking about it logically, if you have a small area, you're going to end up with, let's say, lots of people open schools or enough people open schools that you start having a lot of kids in one place and less kids someplace else and whatever. By the time this whole thing fizzles out, everyone's going to say, well, not even a consequence anyway. It's going to say, oh, well, that's your fault. Like, you should have chose better when the school starts and then it stops or the school shuts down or what have you. It's just an insane thing that we've gone over this. Like we piloted this already in New Orleans and it didn't work. And now we're about to do it nationwide. But the people who want to do this and the people who have the responsibility of stopping them, both of them kind of have the same idea. And I think that's really where our problem is. Upper crust liberals love themselves to sit with friends and schools akin to that. And then conservatives or however people like to identify themselves like religious schools, both of which are private, right? And then you have the sort of merger of the two in the form of charter schools. It doesn't leave any room, really, for public schools to really thrive and do what they need to do. You can do 25 things well or two things, or what is it, 25 things badly or like two things well or what have you. And as far as schools go, it seems that we have decided to do 25 things not so well. And you could say, yes, private schools do great. Look at all the scores and the Ivy League acceptances and what have you. But that's not a typical experience. Which brings me to something I wanted to talk about last week and then life, but I will talk about it now. And people always tend to say, for places like Finland and other places that do school very well, the argument seems to always end with, oh, well, they're so homogenous. That's why they can do it. And I think they mean that racially. Or maybe they mean that in terms of curricula or what have you. But we had a homogenous curriculum, or at least homogenous standards. And that's what kind of No Child Left Behind and Every Student Succeeds was supposed to do. Came up against so much resistance. So it is partially a cultural thing to like not be able to see universality, even in something as simple as learning, like what kids are able to learn. Now, the states had a lot to do with why that didn't work out the way as well as they'd like it to work, because they also did not roll the program out in a way that gave people the latitude to do what needed to be done. There's a lot of talk about scripted curricula and teaching children how to read. And you have to think to yourself, how could it have gotten this bad? I mean, whole school systems. And here in New York, specifically, there was the Lucy Calkin program that was from Columbia University, which I think did most of the heavy lifting. I think people heard Columbia University and they were like, well, of course, it's wonderful. It's got to be wonderful. You don't have to check it. You don't have to like look back on it. You don't have to question it. It's got to be great. So like at every level, you come back to this place of like outsourcing expertise away from people in buildings. And I think this is the end result. So I do think the road through this is going to be, and on some level they're engaged now, but it's a kind of engagement that I'm not really sure where it's going to land, because a lot of this was paved when they opted out of the system. So all the people that are going to be in fact, not all, but let's say the majority of people that are going to be affected by this don't have the option of going someplace else and doing something else. And they'll say, oh, well, the voucher is supposed to give them option. But you're talking about cementing a permanent second class situation, even more so than we already have. People don't just need stuff, right? You give them the money. It's like, what if there are no schools in their neighborhood? Then somebody makes one. Oh, and then when somebody makes more than one, then what? And how much time is lost in this sort of tinkering and this maneuvering? I think a lot. I think too much. If the argument is, oh, the kids can't read and all this sort of thing, spending time just instead of fixing what you have, which I don't think will take that much to do, in the sense of what are things that work, you orient your system towards the majority of children. And that's just not what we have. And now we're taking that orientation away from everybody else in the select few. That's our Ivy League obsession and private school obsession. even though we never try to get public schools to be private schools, in the sense of if this is the thing that's working, then as a policymaker, your whole orientation should be to get this to look like that by any means necessary. And that just needs to be the orientation. Yeah, that's what the Finns did. That's why they're winning. They don't even allow private schools in Finland. They're not allowed to charge tuition. Why? Because you're putting up a barrier. There's no point in putting up a barrier to 5-year-olds. It just doesn't make sense. And their families by extension, especially knowing what we know. So anyway, I will be back with a different rant. And I probably will be back after this DOGE administration decides what it plans to do with the Department of Education. I mean, I'll be watching and waiting, and come back here and join me. We'll talk about it. See you next time. Hey, everybody. Thank you so much for listening and watching. If you loved any part of this video, feel free to hit all the usual buttons, and even better, tell a friend. Take a visit at our sponsor at www.teachertuckshop.com. See you next time, and until then, keep talking.